Welcome to this week's episode of Safe Room, your weekly source for horror gaming discussions and proudly part of Bloody Disgusting's Bloody FM podcast network. I'm your host, Jay Krieger.
And I'm the other one, Neil Bolt.
And this week, we're back after a week off due to partially the holiday, but also I had some unexpectedly having to leave town for some family stuff. But now I'm back and ready to dive right back into our magazine feature and chat about the grab bag. Somewhat limited for me this week, but at the same time, I'm always happy to hear and excited to hear what you've been playing, or in this case, kicking us off with what you've been watching, Neil, that was still in the realm of games.
Yeah, which is something I wanted to bring up a while back, but we've had other things to sort of cover. And the X8 movie, obviously, was one we were kind of discussed in recent months. When we talk about other movies and quite healthy amount of video game horror adaptations at the beginning of the year. Although, as an aside, by the way, the new Silent Hill movie is going onto actual Prime streaming over here soon. So that episode on that maybe to come.
Yeah, it's on Hulu over here in America, so we're definitely going to have to make that commentary or just a general chat about it. We'll revel in, I'm sure, the collective PTSD we'll have from seeing that film, but that's definitely in our futures, I think, in some capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. But in the meantime, onto something that is definitely better in this regard, which is, as I said, the X8 movie. We obviously had an episode on this, the game, a while back as well, which at the time, the idea is cool, very limited, obviously, in what it is, but it's a cheap game, so it makes sense that it wasn't going to be like anything else like that. So the big question going into a movie adaptation would be like, okay, how do you do that? How do you make that work? As an idea, because the game is mere hours at best. If maybe you probably do it in under an hour, can't you? I think so. Like really. So, but the premise is the same. This is by Genki Kawamura. So it's a fully Japanese production. And it still, again, follows a man who is trapped in an endless sterile subway passageway and has to find exit 8 by looking for anomalies along the way. And basically, any sort of oversight on these, anything you don't pick up on, and if you go through, you basically goes back to the beginning of the loop. And basically, you've got to go through 8 times to get out effectively. That's the premise of the game, and it is really that simple in the game. And the early going of this movie does that exact same thing brilliantly. I think, I know it's a very easy environment to do in terms of having like this sort of subway passageway and tile walls and stuff. But so it isn't hard to say that it really does recreate the game perfectly. Yeah, because of course it does. It's not hard in terms, but every little detail's there in that regard, and it's quite fascinating, and it really utilizes the big thing about the game with the idea of like keep your eye out for things like constantly, and the character is basically doing the same and you are looking at the same. Sometimes to us it's a bit more obvious because much like if you were watching someone play the game online or something, you would be like, I can see that, but of course when you're in the moment you don't see things the same way, which translates quite well, I think, to the idea that you get to see these things that are really obvious that they don't notice because obviously they're new to this idea and it's fresh to them. And I think we get to a point in the film where I'm thinking, how much further can you take this? Because sure, you can have setbacks and then come back to obviously eventually getting out, sort of thing. But what more can you tell in that story? And the answer is a lot. It seems like they add this whole other thing about explaining there's the guy that obviously on the route walks the other way in the game and in the film, who doesn't seem to really be a person, but there's a whole sort of explanation about who that is and how this whole loop works beyond you, sort of thing, as well, the protagonist in this case in this film. But what's most fascinating about this is did a lot of human drama and did it quite well. Like, I
Mm,
mean, it's not like ripping up any trees in terms of the kind of film it is in that regard. It
mhm.
does exactly what you think, in terms of like character building and twisty turny stuff. But yeah, like compared to say the Backrooms movie, which we talked about as well, where we sort of
Yeah.
criticized the idea of adding this human story to it that kind of diluted the sort of liminal space horror of it. Here you get the best of both worlds, I think. I was fully convinced that like this passageway was an actual looping thing because of the way it's structured and about how they do the camera cuts and how they go around each one. And sometimes it's from a first person perspective as well, just to sort of give you that sort of nod to the game. And it's the little shifts in perspective that really sort of change how you see things as well, like beyond the obvious. And yeah, it's a fascinating one. I really, really ended up loving this one. I didn't know that we'd get this much out of it. And maybe that's why I ended up liking it more because it is such a simple premise, but it is the absolute opposite to something like, Silent Hill Return to Silent Hill, because it, it's there as something that has all this rich history of story that you can pull from and use. And it, every time anyone does, they just look at it and go, nah, we'll do something else,
Mm.
and then ruins it. Here it's like, there's nothing, there's no story. What do you do? And they find it, they add it. They've got such bare bones that they managed to make something really interesting out of it. Yeah, so I really didn't think we get this much out of it. It ended up being very good. Dare I say it's probably up there among the best sort of video game adaptations,
Mm.
certainly in horror. I
Sure.
think, and again, that might just be the surprise nature of it, but it's not like, oh well, no, it's bad or something, and I'm just saying it's because I didn't expect much that this ends up being
Mm.
great. I think, yeah, in terms of like recreation of the game, in terms of setting and the mood and the tone and everything out, it feels exactly the same,
Mm.
but then adds that layer on top where it feels like its own thing that really expands what we know about the game. And that's a really healthy way to be. I mean, it's very hard, as I said, for a Silent Hill, for instance, where there isn't much you
Yeah.
can do to tamper with it before people get upset. And here you have the opposite. Same with Iron Lung, where
Right.
all the stuff that's in it is stuff that did come later that Dave Szymanski did add, like
Mhm.
in lore dumps and stuff. But it, that film could still be a bit shorter and use some of that stuff still to enrich that world. Yeah, here, yeah, there was nothing, and yet here we are. Something quite fascinating comes out of it in terms of how it all works. I think it's the big thing that I really enjoyed, that idea of there's some rules to this, but
Mhm.
still being ambiguous enough that you're not sure why. I mean, it is a little like the modern sort of horror, are your personal demons the reason behind you being here, sort of thing, and sort of playing with that. But I think the structure of this kind of lets them get away with that a bit.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah, great time.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this plenty of times. Like the biggest thing if you're going to be adapting a game is that you kind of nail the look of it, the vibe of it, ensure that you're kind of like doing right by what inevitably had made the source material notable, right? And so when you've got a game that just revolves around the same hallway, it's like, well, how hard is it to really recreate that faithfully? Not so, but it sounds like in this case, like not only does it capture the sort of energy of the predicament of that time loop and the puzzle aspect of it, um, that is a good foundation for developing more of a narrative or a narrative at all that wasn't there previously. So I think it's kind of like what we had talked about a little bit with the back rooms, where clearly that director really understood the source material and recreating it. And for me, at least, that provided a bit more of I don't know. I wasn't as critical about maybe some of the narrative aspects of that film as some other
Yeah,
people were, just because it was so faithful to the overall identity of Backrooms and really like translated that faithfully onto the screen. And so here, something that has even less of a backstory. It's nice to hear that while it might not be amazing, it still at least feels like it could occupy this world, and the overall just like presentation of the Exit 8 predicament, if you will, is faithfully represented here.
Yeah, I'd actually be quite keen to see how they do the platform 8 game, and
Mm,
because that'd be a bit more. Yeah, I mean, being on a train is a bit different in terms
mhm.
of that structure, and certainly on a narrative way. Would the surprise of what this brings, like
Yeah.
add anything or take away from trying
Mhm.
to adapt that? But yeah, I'd like to find out. That's the main thing.
Yeah, I think, and I haven't played Platform 8 yet. My only thing is that I just my always my worry with video game stuff is just like don't get too into the weeds in terms of like fleshing out the lore. Like that was something again, like with Backrooms, that I enjoyed a lot about that movie that I know maybe frustrated more hardcore fans of backroom stuff, or just like more casual fans of that type of storytelling, is like that it didn't answer a lot of questions. It kind of like let the world speak for itself.
Yeah,
Because more often than not, when you get too into the weeds in terms of the lore and the backstory of things, kind of just doesn't leave as remarkable of a sort of narrative impression on me. So I think that um, if they're able to, at first I have to see Exit 8, so that'll be a priority for me before Platform 8. But so long as it's able to kind of again just retain the overall feeling and authenticity of that world, and doesn't get too into the weeds about trying to explore some kind of like drama storyline such as Backrooms did, which I didn't hate, but I also didn't necessarily think it was all that remarkable. We'll kind of just see how they handle that. But I need to play Platform 8 as well. I haven't gotten around to that yet, so
yeah, there you
that'll
go. So,
something we can check out.
indeed, but on back onto games
Yeah.
themselves, I guess. Your first pick, I think, is like an RPG, if I'm right.
Yeah, so I in my limited time to play games because of traveling and stuff, I decided to dive into a game that I'd picked up a while back, and just like with Exit 8 for you, this was something I meant to chat about, but then didn't get a chance to and whatnot. And that would be Off, which is this, you know, so it originally was released in 2008. It very much is in line with the look of late 90s RPGs, kind of
Mm,
like the Mother series, specifically Earthbound. And this was released in 2008 by a Belgian team, and then it wasn't officially translated into English until 2011. And then there was a remake that came out in 2025 that made it more readily available and was like fully translated into English in terms of like, oh, I think I screwed that up. So it was originally, the English translation was like fan translation, and then the 2025 release had an official English
mm,
translation from, the developer Fangamer who handled the remake. And so this is, I think, like the tone of this game is definitely in the realm of like something like Undertale, where it's
yeah.
very much this like idiosyncratic kind of world filled with these very strange characters. And the logic behind a lot of this stuff is like very bizarre, but at the same time, like it all comes together into a world that you more or less begin to like understand that while it is bizarre, and while initially it might not make sense, it's backed up by some really great humor. And I think more importantly, like the mechanics there are quite strong. So you play as basically this humanoid entity that is known as the batter. He's quite
Mm,
literally a baseball player. And his, much like the protagonist of the Mother series, it's his main weapon is a baseball bat at that. And so he
yeah.
goes around and he's on this like sacred mission to purify this world of ghosts. And you kind of have this Cheshire cat almost that is kind of your tour guide through this world, and is training you and is making you understand like your mission and whatnot. And for a game that revels in being bizarre, like the mechanics, I think, are very strong at that. Like it is a proper, true to form RPG of that 90s sort of JRPG fare. And I think that that's what is most impressive to me about games like Off, same with games like Undertale, is that they don't get lost in their creative endeavors that seemingly have no sort of like restraint, if you will. It's truly like these creative people that are going off and making something you've never seen before that is tonally all over the map, that, you know, is probably a nightmare to properly market because of the fact it's so in its own lane in terms of being this like niche approach to world building, to storytelling, to artistic design. And yet that's not at the like it the mechanics are not taking on the brunt of that in terms of like any sacrifices being made. It plays as strategically as you would want from like a hardcore JRPG. And you have this kind of like versatility that you'd be expecting where you start to gather a party and you get these various upgrades and character roles in combat that you can get with the various abilities. Um, I think in terms of that, you know, it plays very traditionally to the trajectory of a JRPG where, you know, you have your turns that you're waiting for the enemy meter to fill up before they can attack. You have a certain amount of like power points that you can use on those special abilities before overly relying on your sort of standard go-to attacks. But um, yeah, it's just a game that is so wholly original in terms of like being in its own lane that I really fell in love with this from the outset. It's got this fucking crazy soundtrack that matches the oddball tone of the world. And at the same time, you know, the puzzles there within, I think, are really challenging, but there's a great variety there that didn't find myself getting burnt out to the degree that I might if it was a game that presented and you're like, okay, this is another memorize the numbers puzzle. You might find one that is asking you to memorize a set of numbers for like an elevator code, but the ways in which you go about discovering them is different each time. So like there's one where you're in a library and then you have to like match pages in various books to get the code, but then the building itself has a time loop. So you have to, or yeah, like a time loop. So you have to basically ensure that you're memorizing the layout of this library on top of trying to find the right pages and piecing them together. Another time you might have to go down this like bloodstream in the back of this like duck boat to try to find the different numbers and then finding the coalescent location of these pillars you have to hit in certain order. Like it's constantly sort of just like throwing you these curveballs, whether it's from a design standpoint, whether it's a storytelling standpoint. And it really is this kind of game that I found myself enthralled with and couldn't really guess what was going to come next because it's so refreshing to play something like this that keeps you guessing and you're constantly entertained and surprised by like what it's going to do next, no matter how long you've been playing it for. Like even at the 8 or 9 hour mark that I was at, I was still just like, I really can't guess what's going to happen next because it's constantly kind of reinventing itself, which I just was completely captivated by.
Yeah, I mean, it's seems to be like almost a hidden thing in that regard that it was so considering how influential it's ended up being on
Yeah.
so many games. But yeah, I mean, given that and how many influences there have been had on games that have come forward since that, do you feel that it feels a little too familiar in any way because of that, or does it really just still stand distinctly on its own in terms of what it's doing?
You know, for me, I came to Undertale just 1 or 2 years ago. Like I was really
Yeah.
late to the party with that one. And that was your question is exactly what I was thinking with the first hour or two of this game of Off, because I was thinking to myself, like, is this just going to feel like it is an offshoot or derivative of what I've already played? I realized that this came out before that originally, but at the same time, as you said, it was like this hidden game essentially due to the limited availability. But I really didn't feel that way about Off at all because of the fact that, again, when you have a team that is so creatively in their own lane, um, and they're going about that idiosyncratic approach to world building and game design that is wholly in line with their own sensibilities, it really doesn't feel derivative because of the fact that you're being exposed to this world and these characters that have a certain way of speaking, and the ways in which you might get thrown this bizarre mini game out of nowhere at this bizarre moment, that it doesn't feel like, oh, this is just like Undertale light or something to that effect.
Yeah.
Granted, I've only played Undertale the one time. Maybe people that are more hardcore about that game would feel differently, but for me, I found that this was a game that, even if I only played, 30 minutes or an hour of it at a time, um, I just was so enraptured with like this world, and I love this oddball soundtrack that it has. And it was something that I just really, really was taken with, in terms of its creativity, which again, like, it was obviously refreshing, but at the same time, like the confidence with which to present something that is so strange, but having no reservations about kind of like delivering on their vision for this, and not worrying about alienating audiences from this game with, maybe the humor here doesn't jive, or the approach to just like the puzzles and things might not jive with people. But I think for somebody like myself that definitely has a short attention span, it kept constantly like reinvigorating my interest in this game because of that ability to continually redefine certain variables about off, and the overall presentation. And yeah, it's one of those things where like the art style too, like if you look at some of the screens on, Steam or whatnot, it has this really vibrant, odd mixture of a color palette, but at the same time, even you have this like really terrific artwork from the world, because the game is in a smaller aspect ratio, but rather than just have like a black border, they have this really odd art that you actually will discover in game, which, you find new wallpapers and things in games all the time, but the game world will automatically update with a new art once you discover it, that is reflective of the current world that you're exploring. So like one of the early worlds is a mining town, and you're supposed to purify the mines of these ghosts. So you get this like mine themed art border. And then when you're in the library, that updates to like this ghostly library theme. Like just these little design aspects that I really loved, and continually just like took this world that I was really couldn't wait to like explore more of and meet the next weirdo character, and just continually like reinvigorated my enjoyment and the sense of wonder that the game gives off, right from that opening hour to, the very end of it. I think took me about, man, what did it take me? About 8 hours to get
Mm.
through, just because I was like really, I think I overestimated earlier, but I think it took me about 8 hours because I was going through and making sure that I would discover all the side stuff, and like just wanting to interact with all of these oddball characters that I could. So it could probably take you a little less than 8 hours, but at the same time, if you're as taken with this world as I am, I think you'll enjoy your time with it all the same.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem to be that the right kind of absurd that
Mhm.
its influence is obviously borrowed from as well. So yeah, that's definitely one I've got to check out.
Have you had any fondness or experience with games like Undertale? I know you haven't gotten to off, but
Yeah, no, I loved Undertale. I thought it was great, and it's been weirdly like an in-family favorite, despite everyone playing it on their own.
mm,
Separate. Everyone's sort of come to it and like played it and enjoyed
mhm,
it. And obviously, it's with like kids' generation, like the music and stuff of that game is like been like this big influential thing, and
mm,
just like everything about those games. It's that thing we kind of described before. The internet games that really just have you know their maximum impact because of like all the stuff around it that gets
mm,
shared. In terms of like the internet, the community. So yeah, and obviously that was like such a big breakout. Which was what, so 10 years ago now, I think. I'm thinking about it. So yeah, I mean, and that's in its own way become the next sort of step in that. Both games, of course, as you say, being influenced by stuff like the Mother series as well. So
mm,
it is really quite cool to see that sort of different sort of eras interpreting that style, in their own way, like and having it's nice that it's more readily available now to have off as part of that. And yeah, I think from everything you said and from everything I've seen review wise, it's like it does seem to be that, if you have such a great appreciation of Undertale, that it'll be something to investigate and maybe see where some of that influence came from, while still being fresh in itself.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. And if you ever get around to it, I'd be happy to hear what your experiences were like with it in terms of, being
Yeah.
so familiar with Undertale, certainly more than myself, but that could be a chat for the future. But yeah, before we move on to what else we've been playing recently, why don't we take a quick break and you can kick us things off with what you'd been playing recently.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll have more on those in a moment. And we are back from our break. And Neil, what else had you been playing since last we chatted?
So due to work, this mainly was, but I've put more hours in than I probably would have by now. But I've been playing the life/farming sim Moonlight Peaks, which, again, when we talk about games influenced by games of many decades prior, the stuff like Harvest Moon, which was then the inspiration for Stardew Valley, which in turn is the inspiration for games like Moonlight Peaks. Now, Moonlight Peaks being mentioned here specifically is because it is supernatural based in terms of like the theme of it all. It's set in like a world of monsters where you are a vampire, the son or daughter of the Draculas, who has run away from home to the old hometown, if you will, to seek out a life for themselves, sort of prove themselves, sort of thing, and starting with doing up the old family homestead, which is a wreck. And yeah, I mean, at this point, if you've played Stardew Valley, it's that same sort of initial setup. Learn how to do all the different things, farming, getting to know the townspeople, doing little tasks, and yeah, just generally building your life in this area. I mean, initially, it's much more story orientated than Stardew Valley. You get to learn like the interpersonal dramas of everyone here. While it is this is a world of like that only exists at night compared to say those farming games where you like the end of the day, all right, get some sleep. Obviously, you're a vampire, so you can only work during the night.
Mm.
So, and it's not like a normal place. The crops you grow aren't quite normal. There's different things. There's all sorts of other stuff like witchcraft and like the like, and you can, pretty much befriend anyone in this community. You're not related to that many of them, so it's definitely one for the romanceables out there. So I mean, you, as yourself have said, are a vampire. There are vampire families. There are werewolf families. There are mermaid families. There's seers. It goes on and on. There's all sorts of these things, and you basically can learn like different skills from each of them to sort of use your shape shifting ability to sort of progress around new places. So you can run faster as a cat, or you can swim with a mermaid tail, kind of thing, and stuff like that. Otherwise it's generally just a farming sim like you expect. It's because you are a vampire and this is that sort of world. Like I said, it's not really about being grisly or gooey, or it is quite chill. It's very chill. But I mean, if you want like a horror themed sort of family game, it's like perfect in that regard. And even though it's like covering that same sort of model, there are things it does differently to a lot of these farming life sims. The whole alchemy and potion brewing stuff is quite cool to figure out. Lord knows I should know. I've had to spend a lot of time figuring it out this week for guides and stuff. But yeah, just building up like any game like this, once you get into the groove of it, you really do just sort of have that one more day or night in this case of doing these things and learning the dramas of all the people. And yeah, it's very, very chill, and you can date death if you want. So there's that who is in vacation mode in this game and wearing a Hawaiian shirt. It's yeah, it's probably it's tamer even than say Stardew Valley, which has like a little connotations to something darker in certain places with the mines and stuff. But yeah, utilizing that as an idea, and being able to do all these different mini games. I mean, there's a cross stitching mini game and a flower arranging mini game that are strangely compelling. Like I didn't think there'd be much to it. There's a card game where you can go collecting cards as well to play it. That people play around town. Yeah, it's very endearing. Like not much new to see in terms of structure. If like we're used to these kind of games, and you put
Mm,
like hundreds of thousands of hours into your Stardew Valleys and such. But
mm.
if you are like more of a horror leaning and you want to have something that is a bit more cozy that you can play around the family that has that sort of supernatural feel to it, it's quite a charming little thing.
Yeah, just from looking over the Steam page for it, this seems kind of like the ideal twee horror gateway horror kind of game. Whether you got young kids and something like Stardew Valley or Graveyard Keeper might be a little bit too complex or hardcore in terms of mechanics and things like that. This seems like well, not to say it's an overly simple game because I haven't played it, but it just seems like something that is a bit more approachable and maybe even, dare I say, like pick up and play esque. Like you have some, what are your own little assignment you want to give yourself, whether it's the card realm of things or, planting or meeting other people in this world, then that might be something you could pick up and play for like an hour. Is that kind of a fair assessment?
Yeah. I mean, you can obviously the life sort of sim nature of it means are kind of constantly progressing stuff.
Mhm.
So, but when we talk about games where you can just sort of go, yeah, I'll play out a day of this because I want to like
Mm,
tend to my crops, or I want to go and investigate this thing over here that I've now
mm,
got access to. It's like it provides like little mini adventures in itself. I mean, the early going is quite tutorial story heavy in terms of teaching you stuff, which when you've
mm,
played these kind of games before, it's like you sat there kind of going, I know this, I know this. You don't have to tell me in this much detail. And even if you are trying to introduce me to some of the characters, which
mm,
again would be fine if that was a consistent thing throughout in terms of like learning about the characters and who live in this place. And
mm.
but it isn't like you get a few in-depth ideas of what's going on. Then after that, you kind of have to go work for it if you want to find out more from others. Which yes, and that's probably a side effect of having so many sort of friendship, romanceable sort of characters. Is that
Mhm.
while there's a lot of choice, it's like it means you don't get to know much about a lot of them because of it, unless you really invest the time. Which I guess is the point in the long run. But yeah, I do think that it's definitely one of the more solid sort of games in this genre I've seen.
Nice. Well, I think, in terms of that farming sim genre, there's plenty of room for, different approaches and utilizations of horror. So seems like this one is fairly successful.
Yeah. But what about you? What else did you have for this week?
Yeah. The last thing, in addition to, I'm not going to spend another end section of grab bag chatting about Marvel Midnight Suns because that's also been taking up so much of my time in the best way possible. Maybe once I get around to playing some of the DLC, I'll have something new to report on that front. But otherwise, I decided to revisit a game from, oh gosh, when did this come out? I believe it was last year. That
Yes.
being Pigface from developer Tito Loves You and published by Dread XP, which for folks that don't remember, this was basically this semi open world arena, kind of like first person shooter that harkens back to like hardcore 90s first person shooters, but has a bit of a Hitman tinge to it with an aesthetic that's in the realm of things like condemned criminal origins, and that, you're a cleaner, you're dropped into this large kind of sandbox map that has targets that you have to take out to complete the mission. And then naturally, there's about a half dozen, or if not more in some cases, routes within to penetrate, the safe room that they're in or the environment there within. And so you get to kind of pick out your loadout, and then players have free reign to not only locate the assassination targets, but how they choose to do that. Do you want to go in quiet like I do with the sniper rifle from afar and start to pick off patrolling goons before moving in and getting loud, or you just say fuck it and I'll just get loud from the jump and mow down hordes of enemies? And so since I chatted about this game last, there have been a couple of content updates. So we've gotten some new maps, which I'll chat about, but also in what is the most recent update since March of this year, there's like a new kicking mechanic. So you can kick guys, which is great because it momentarily stuns them, which is great if you want to finish a guy off with a headshot, or if you've got a crowd of enemies, which if you go loud, that can often be the case. You can kick a guy into a crowd to kind of like stumble them, so you can either retreat or pounce on them with your melee weapon or firearm of choice. And, you know, with the new maps, since the last time I played, there's like an abandoned shopping mall. There's a subway map, which is very much like a challenge room where you've got these waves of enemies that you have to repel and you utilize the environment, which is what lets that kicking mechanic be really helpful. Because kind of like, what was it? Might and Magic. Geez, I can't remember which one it was. It was like Dark Ages or something like that, where they had that kick mechanic. You can kick guys into walls and spikes and like skewer them basically, which is always super satisfying. And there's like a new map, Penitentiary, which is a prison that is having a rave in it. And so you have to contend with a lot of noise that can kind of like block out those audio cues that you're usually listening for. You usually are kind of like hear enemy chatter or enemies reacting to maybe you making noise, and that sort of like deafening cacophony of EDM music really drowns that out and makes it a little more challenging in that regard. But I think just like generally speaking, some of the tweaks to enemy AI has been really strong in terms of just like taking an experience that already I enjoyed and kind of like cranking up the difficulty in a sense without it feeling artificially so. So it's more about enemies being more reactive. They're, you know, essentially being able to detect not only enemies or allies of theirs being killed more quickly based on them like falling near them, but also they can detect shots that are impacting the environment around them. Because inevitably, if you're sniping, you're going to miss a shot or two. If you throw a hammer or a melee weapon and hit a wall or break a bottle by accident, enemies are going to be more reactive to that and going to investigate, which takes already, again, that challenging aspect of this and the sort of hardcore 90s aspect of that difficulty. And more importantly, just like making players make every shot count rather. So I think for an experience that I already really enjoyed, it just feels even more refined in that regard. And, you know, there's some weapon balancing things going on here. There's some new weapons that I've been getting to play around with that I've enjoyed. And yeah, I'm really, really impressed with PIGFACE still. And I think the improvements, if anything, just like give this game, which already had a lot of replay value, even more so.
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, from what I remember of it, it was certainly a bit more shootery based when it first came out, but like all the changes and stuff seemed to make it a lot more immersive simmy than that, which, yeah, there were elements of that there, I think before, but it seems to definitely go more that way now, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely it has. So like there was a light immersive sim aspect to it previously, but in the difficulty feeling like it was more refined, there's a lot more emphasis on that immersive sim quality. You know, the immersive sim aspect was the player decides which of the routes, when they discover them, they want to take them to like infiltrate one of those compounds. But now like there's a lot more emphasis because of that difficulty on the loadout that you're using. It's not just like, cool, I want to use this melee weapon because I like it and that gun because it's strong. It's like, no, you need to make sure that you're equipping the right kind of mask, which gives your player different attributes. So if I'm going to do a melee build, I'm going to get a melee centric mask, and vice versa if you're going firearms based, but also the types of like health aid items. Am I going to use health packs? Am I going to use like these pills that will slow down time if I'm going to do this kind of like mayhem run? And, you know, they included a chainsaw since last time I got to play this. So that just like adds a nice chaos element to when I decide to freak out and go melee build, which is a lot of good fun.
That's good to hear. I mean, this definitely sounds like it's worth going back to as well now with that
Yeah.
sort of update to it as well. So, because I mean, the concept of it alone anyway was great. I think that
Hmm.
whole sort of, you said, that manhunt slash
Yeah.
hitman slash, well, kind of soldier of fortune-ish in terms of
Yeah.
like the GBness of it, if you will. Like I quite liked. So yeah, I mean, it's still in early access as well. So the fact they're
Yes.
building and building still, it's looking increasingly promising.
Yeah, that was the one thing that I had forgotten was that it wasn't even a full release yet. It's still in early access. The game hasn't been updated since March, which I've seen some people groaning about on the discussion forum on Steam or on Reddit. But it's still in early access. There's a good amount of content, and even I reviewed this for uh, a website when it initially came out last year. This was already quite strong. It didn't feel
Yeah,
like it was maybe the sort of like buggy mess that a lot of early access games end up being. And that doesn't mean that like there aren't still maybe some rough edges, but post the updates to the game, I find that this is so far the most refined version of it, both in terms of those enemy AI things I was talking about, but also just the ways in which the player handles and controls. And like you said, there's a good amount of replayability here and going back and trying to master some of these maps. And even a small mechanic like adding a kick feature can introduce a whole new realm of strategy to a game that already was quite strong. And you get a lot of fun out of some of the gore here, like you had said, in terms of it being akin to Soldier of Fortune. Like there's really great gore and satisfying head pops and whatnot in this one. So yeah, I still think that I mean this game is what, $12 full price. It's still more than worth it for that. And I'm sure that there's going to be, more content down the pipe as developer Tito loves you as indicated. So I think if anything, there's even more reasons to check out Pigface if you haven't already done so. And for folks like yourself, there's more than enough reasons to kind of go back and spend another couple of hours with this one with the new maps and new content and whatnot.
right.
Yeah. But I think that's going to do it this week for our grab bags. Another short and sweet one, but now that we're back, or I'm back rather, we will be returning to that magazine style with maybe a feature here and there, and of course games we've been chatting about. But before we wrap up, we've you know uh, gone through our grab bag, chatted about those tasty morsels, but we're going to end things this week with a listener email that we received. And I apologize to the sender that, I missed this while I was away, but we're getting to it now. And so this is from listener Alex, who says he listens to the podcast at work and really enjoys the way that we describe our gaming experiences with horror. He says he loves horror games, but he finds that it's hard to find the time to truly enjoy them for himself. He notes he's currently at the Labyrinth section in Silent Hill 2, and it's becoming a bit of a mountain to climb as he only gets about an hour, if that, a night to play games once his kids are in bed and his wife is off watching her shows that she's watching. So he says that, while he loves our Horror Bite section, also, he only has a PS5. And he was curious, if there were any PS5 horror games that we could recommend that would suit an hour a night pick up and play sort of style of games. Um, I guess I had missed this one. You and I chatted about it previously, but he says, I don't want to be ringing in the fence with roguelite games. So other than maybe one or two games that we'd previously chatted about recommending, like I think we had said something like Binding of Isaac and Ball Pit. I guess we'll scratch
Yeah.
those. But other than that, there are some horror games on PS5 that do accommodate a pick up and play, maybe hour a night play style. What would be your sort of first recommendation along those?
Um, so in small scale, but not too small scale, and okay, maybe not like horror in a very intense sense, but pools is
Hmm.
probably something I go for if you're going for that sort of liminal horror space thing, but in a relaxing way that you can kind of play in short chunks because I think there's about 6 chapters to it, and you finish it in like 3 hours. And yeah, it's good that you want to sort of get a game done, like, and get one out there fairly quick in those little chunks. That's not a bad place to go. I think it has great atmosphere for what it is as well. Like,
Mm.
if you do have the luxury of having headphones on, believe me, I know the toils of having to keep an ear out for the noises and and being cold. But yeah, even if you can, it's just a wonderful little experience, like level to level, and fairly intuitive in terms of like what you can go in. I do realize that most of the things we were thinking of probably do kind of qualify for roguelike kind of things, but
Mm.
that would have been my first pick. And then, I mean, if you wanted something more classically survival horror that is established as well, I mean, Resident Evil Revelations, I
Mm.
think, because it is very episodic and in a shorter way than Revelations 2 is, which, you could argue is the better game. But I do think if you want that sort of snack size Resident Evil experience, this is, yeah, pretty good version of that, like that, and you can do most levels within an hour. So yeah, that wouldn't be a bad shout. Um,
Yeah.
c-
I think
can
in
Yeah, go
terms
on
of
if you
the
want.
in terms of like the realm of non-roguelike stuff, I think the first game that came to mind for me was Until Dawn, which is a game that's broken up into chapters along those lines, something like the Dark Picture series. You know, it might be an hour and a little bit of change, and it might not even be an hour in some instances, given how long those chapter sections are when they're changing through the different cast of characters in that game. So if you're looking for something like story based that you could get through and have like a perfect start stop point, I think those games are a pretty great start in that regard.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good shout. Definitely the Dark Pictures, especially because they aren't like especially long games to
Mm.
finish by comparison as well. I
Yep.
think most of them are about 5-ish hours, so tops. Obviously with replay that if you need them. I would throw in Carrion, like in
Mm.
terms of just like because level based could probably do one, maybe two levels in a night quite easily, and it's just quite fun to have that sort of you're the monster and devouring everything in your path sort of thing. And yeah, it's cerebral enough, I think, as well, just because with the puzzling nature of what you're doing. I would have said World of Horror, but I understand that is a bit roguelike in
Mm.
terms of what it's doing, but it is more story based to a degree. So you basically, if you haven't played it, you have these little like Junji Ito style scenarios that can crop up with randomized elements to them based on each time you go through. So it's like a mini RPG, choose your own adventure thing each time, and so effectively you can play it and get something out each time and a particular outcome, and they shouldn't take super long. So I think if you just on the edges of that sort of roguelike sort of thing. Did you have anything else?
I think it was a game that you had mentioned, like the Oxenfree games.
Yeah.
Those have a pretty great, not only story and whatnot, but those I feel like sort of checkpoints, if you will, were fairly plentiful. So you can have a fairly productive hour session with that. And along those lines, stuff like Inside or, Little Nightmares. That's one of
Oh
those
yeah.
series that, again, you if you got an hour or even a little bit less than that a night, you can have some meaningful moments of horror and puzzle and whatnot that will, hopefully satisfy that time distinction for you.
Yeah. Buckshot Roulette. That's not a bad shout, I
Oh
think.
yeah. No,
I
great.
know again, a little bit roguelitey, but not as much as Inscription, which was obviously a very big influence, which I
Right.
would have said. Um, but I mean, they do have story elements, at least if we are talking in this sort of
Mhm.
realm. You do get progression in a story sense, which
Mhm.
is quite fun. Um, I don't think what else would be quite good. This one, I mean, Dredge isn't a bad shout. I
No,
mean,
not at all.
you could do the mission in a night, like, and because again, you could just go out, sail out, plan it out, and get a bit of story, get a bit of exploration,
Yeah.
find something that you could have your time with. have, and it'll leave you thinking about it a bit, in a very particular way with that sort of cosmic horror vibe. Yeah, I think that's not a bad shout. Thinking about it, if I do say so myself.
No, I completely co-sign that. That was for a long time. Dredge was one of those games after I'd finished it the first time. I would just go back, if I'm on the couch watching something with my fiance, just like have that on the laptop, and it could even just be like aimless exploring sometimes, where it's just like, it's a world that you want to explore, and sometimes you want to take that extra risk and go out at night to catch those extra more Cthulhu tinged denizens of the deep. So that's a fantastic recommendation.
And I know it's actually come to console recently. Is Hollow Body has recently got a console
Oh,
release on PS5. So again, survival horror with a very sort of retro aesthetic. Absolutely check that one out as well, because I think especially it's a very British themed as well, I will say. So in terms of its styling, so it's definitely worth checking out if you can.
yeah, that's a great shout at that. Also, I guess maybe as we're talking about things that were recent, I think it was recently brought to PS5, would be Dead Reset, which we reviewed. I really, really enjoyed that. And that was something that came out last year. That's more of like an FMV story-based game, but there's a lot of replayability. And again, it's broken up by chapters. So you can kind of play that one a chapter at a time. It doesn't take a terrible amount of time to get through, but at the same time, it has these very defining sort of stopping points. So it's like watching an episode of TV, basically, which again is in the realm of sort of the experience of the Dark Pictures games and Until Dawn. But
There's the El Paso Elsewhere. That's another one, which is also now on
oh,
console. It's been on console since pretty much not long after it came out on Windows, I think. So yeah, it's PS5 definitely has that. So that's another one.
yeah, if you want to get your sort of horror Max Payne sort of fix, that's definitely a great shout as well. But thank you, Alex, for that email. We appreciate it. And as always, if people are looking for recommendations or want to throw some words of praise our way, just kidding, you can always send us a message or an email for all of our socials. It's at Safe Room Pod, and our email is saferoompod@gmail.com. But yeah, Neil, until then, as always, my friend, it's a pleasure chatting horror with you for Safe Room.
Back at you, my man. Until the next time.
Thank you for listening to this week's main feed episode of Safe Room. If you've enjoyed our horrifying discussions, please take a moment to rate and review the show on your preferred podcast platform, as this helps us immensely in ensuring that the show continues to grow. For any and all show updates and additional content, you can follow Safe Room on all of our socials, which are linked in the episode notes, at Safe Room Pod. And finally, you can send any and all emails to saferoompod@gmail.com. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you guys next time.